On March 11, 1945, at Kanoya Air Base on the Japanese island of Kyushu, an intelligence officer anxiously scrutinized aerial photographs taken by submarine number 47. These images revealed an object that would become a haunting nightmare for the Japanese Naval Command until the very end of the war. The photographs clearly showed a concrete vessel devoid of any visible armament. It carried heavy refrigeration equipment, and numerous smaller boats bustled around it, engaged in cargo transfer. The object was classified as an unknown logistics vessel. Through the grainy periscope images taken near Ulithi Atoll, a scene emerged that defied all notions of military priorities held by the Imperial Japanese Navy. While pilots on the airfield desperately tried to extract aviation fuel from pine roots, part of a program involving 34,000 distillation units, yielding only 3,000 barrels, and mechanics siphoned industrial alcohol from aircraft refueling equipment, the Americans deployed a seemingly non-combat vessel solely dedicated to producing ice cream. On the runway, 24 Yokosuka P-1Y-1 Francis bombers stood ready for Operation Ton No. 2. The pilots, many with fewer than 50 hours of flight training, were tasked with crashing their explosive-laden planes into the American fleet at Ulithi. None of them suspected they were about to attack an enemy that had built a $1 million floating factory capable of producing 500 gallons of ice cream per shift, or 5 tons of frozen dessert daily, while Japanese soldiers frantically scraped pine bark for fuel. History preserves many astonishing facts about World War II, and one of them concerns a seemingly minor episode that occurred after the devastating defeat of the Japanese fleet at Leyte Gulf in October 1944. The first hints of the Americans' unusual treatment of Japanese prisoners emerged during the interrogations of surviving sailors. When the aircraft carrier Zuikaku sank on October 25, 1944, American destroyers, like guardian angels, plucked Japanese shipwrecked sailors from the oil-slicked waters. The destroyers Wakatsuki and Kuwa pulled 862 officers and crewmen from the sea, while 842 remained forever in the depths. But instead of the expected execution, the rescued Japanese were astonished by what awaited them. They received medical attention, food, and among other things, something unprecedented: frozen cream served in shining metal cups. Allied interrogation dossiers preserved one survivor's testimony, full of amazement and disbelief. An American sailor brought me what he called ice cream. I had heard of this dessert but had never tasted it, and now, after the greatest naval battle in history, the Americans are treating enemies we tried to kill just moments ago to a frozen dessert. This episode vividly illustrates the contrast between Japanese and American cultures of warfare. However, Vice Admiral Takajiro Onishi, the architect of the special kamikaze assault units, tried to suppress the spread of such stories. He understood that for his desperate tactics to succeed, the suicide pilots had to believe in the weakness and effeminacy of the Americans, their inability to endure the hardships of war. Only then, he believed, could the Japanese fighting spirit overcome the enemy's industrial superiority. The truth about humane treatment of prisoners could shatter the remaining morale, already undermined by a series of defeats. The first officially recorded encounter of the Japanese with the American ice marvel occurred during a clandestine underwater operation. In December 1944, Captain Zenji Orita, commanding the submarine I-47, surfaced near Ulithi Atoll. The objective was to conduct a periscope reconnaissance mission prior to an attack by Kaiten 10 man torpedoes Orita, who commanded I-47 from mid-1944 until the end of hostilities, was known for his daring and unconventional operations. His logbook, now preserved in Japanese naval archives, contains an entry, 06th Home for 30, discovered a large concrete vessel approximately 80 meters long with no visible armament, heavy refrigeration equipment installed on deck, small vessels bustling around, engaged in cargo transfer. The officer identified the barge as a BRL, Barge Refrigerated Large, a specialized US Navy vessel converted from an Army concrete barge. This floating ice cream palace cost a substantial $1 million, equivalent to approximately $17.2 million today. This floating factory produced about 38 liters of refreshing dessert every 7 minutes, capable of storing up to 7,500 liters at 9.4 degrees C. The barge operated continuously, ensuring the production of approximately 1,800 liters of ice cream per shift, which amounted to about 5 tons daily. By January 1945, the situation for the Japanese Empire had reached a critical point, its desperation so profound that Western observers found it difficult to imagine. Fuel reserves were so depleted that even the flagship battleship Yamato was forced to conduct training while at anchor to conserve precious oil. An ambitious project to extract oil from pine roots, involving tens of thousands of distillation units and hundreds of thousands of workers, including millions of school children, yielded only a negligible amount of aviation fuel, a mere drop in the ocean compared to the needs of the American fleet, the 343rd Naval Air Group. Kokutai, Japan's last elite fighter unit, was under the command of Captain Minoru Chenda, the man behind the planning of the Pearl Harbor attack. The unit faced a severe problem of malnutrition among its personnel. Captain Chenda, who led this unit from January 15, 1945, was tasked with ensuring air superiority for kamikaze operations. Pilots suffered from night blindness due to vitamin deficiencies, their reflexes dulled, and they experienced difficulties performing combat maneuvers due to physical weakness. In his operational reports, Captain Chenda bitterly noted that his pilots' vision deteriorated at night and malnutrition sapped their strength. He wrote that they trembled from weakness during maneuvers, but despite this continued to fight an enemy that grew stronger every day. A stark contrast prevailed among the kamikaze units preparing for their final flights. Young pilots, often barely adults, and with only 40-50 hours of flight experience, consumed a humble meal of rice balls and dried fish, washing it down with ceremonial sake before their suicidal missions. They wore senembari, sashes adorned with 1,000 stitches, lovingly sewn by women in hopes of spiritual protection, though it was clear to all that no fabric could shield them from the barrage of anti-aircraft fire. At Kanoya Air Base on March 11, 1945, kamikaze pilots, aware of their impending demise, penned their death poems before taking their places in the cockpits of their death-laden planes. One such poem, carefully preserved in the Kanoya Air Base Museum, reads, "Like cherry blossoms in spring, may we fall pure and radiant." These brave but doomed aviators met their deaths in a desperate attempt to ram ships anchored at Ulithi. On that fateful evening at 8:07 p.m., the aircraft carrier USS Randolph CV-15 shuddered from an enemy strike. A Francis bomber, having broken through the curtain of fire, unleashed its deadly payload onto the carrier's stern, claiming the lives of 25 sailors and wounding 105 more. For 3 weeks, while repairs were underway, requiring 29 tons of structural steel, including I-beams salvaged from the ruins of a Japanese sugar factory on Saipan. The carrier's crew assuaged their grief by consuming some 3,000 gallons of ice cream delivered from shore bases. Ulithi Atoll, barely discernible on geographical maps, represented a phenomenon utterly alien to Japanese perception. This miniature coral islet in the Pacific had been transformed into a colossal naval base, unparalleled globally. By spring 1945, as Japanese kamikazes launched their desperate attacks, 722 warships had gathered in Ulithi Lagoon, an impressive armada outnumbering the entire Imperial Japanese Navy at its peak. It was from here that the staging ground for the decisive invasion of Okinawa was prepared. The base's infrastructure was astounding in its scale and technological level, surpassing anything Japanese military strategists could have imagined. It housed sophisticated mechanical workshops on floating docks where ships were repaired and maintained. The Fleet Post Office processed approximately 20 tons of mail daily, ensuring communication between sailors and their families. For crew entertainment, cinemas showed Hollywood blockbusters, and baseball fields on Mogmog Island hosted sports competitions. A specialized bakery ship continuously baked fresh bread for thousands of sailors. The USS Abertan, in addition to desalinating seawater, was renowned for its pies, which became a symbol of home comfort far from native shores. But the true legend of Ulithi was the ice cream barge, producing about 5 tons of this refreshing dessert daily. The ice cream barge was immensely popular among American sailors. Destroyer crews, lacking ice cream-making equipment on board, sent boats to it with empty containers, which returned filled with gallons of vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry treats. The barge served everyone without exception, from high-ranking admirals to ordinary sailors, embodying the principle of democracy through a love for dairy products. Japanese intelligence faced significant difficulties in trying to comprehend the U.S. fleet's supply priorities, which seemed utterly illogical from the perspective of Japanese military doctrine. Captain Tamichihara Hara, a celebrated destroyer commander who had endured the crucible of key battles, from the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor to the war's final acts, shared his reflections on the astonishing American provisions designed to ensure the comfort of their sailors. Hara, who commanded the destroyers Amatsukase and Sheigure and participated in 14 major naval battles, recalled the initial disbelief regarding intelligence reports. In his memoirs, Japanese Destroyer Captain, he wrote, "At first we thought intelligence had made a mistake. It was impossible to believe that ships laden with ice cream ingredients were sailing while we desperately searched for every drop of fuel. To the Japanese military mind, it was utterly incomprehensible that any navy would prioritize such luxuries in the midst of total war with the very survival of the nation at stake." Japan's naval intelligence meticulously analyzed intercepted American supply lists, which seemed encrypted. Japanese analysts concluded that ice cream mix actually meant ammunition, chocolate syrup was fuel oil, and strawberry topping referred to medical supplies. No military force, in their opinion, would prioritize actual dessert ingredients under conditions of fierce combat, where every ton of cargo was critical for victory or defeat. Despite this, evidence accumulated undeniably. Captured enemy soldiers persistently asserted their presence of ice cream on every American ship larger than a destroyer. intelligence data confirmed the existence of refrigerated vessels at every American military base. Supply lists consistently featured significant tonnage allocated for morale provisions, volumes that surpassed the total food rations provided to Japanese fleets. Particularly valuable information was provided by submarine I-58's commander Mochitsura Hashimoto, who later became famous for sinking the USS Indianapolis on July 30th, 1945. During previous reconnaissance operations while observing American bases, he personally witnessed scenes through his periscope that seemed incredible. In his memoirs, Sunk, the story of the Japanese submarine fleet, 1941-1945, Hashimoto noted that the Americans had created veritable floating cities of abundance. While the Japanese meticulously accounted for torpedoes and strictly rationed fuel, the Americans maintained a peaceful way of life even amidst war. This was a power the Japanese could not imagine, an ability to preserve comfort even during an apocalypse. Impressions of encounters with the American fleet caused surprise and even bewilderment among the Japanese. One high-ranking Japanese naval officer, upon encountering an American squadron, noted in his diary an unusual sight. "We watched the American ships, and we were struck that they seemed to experience no difficulties with supplies." His deputy left similar notes. "We saw sailors lined up at points that to us appeared to be refreshment stations. The ships were loaded not with fuel or ammunition, but with white containers, which we later found out contained ice cream. They were fighting a different war than ours." Japanese pilots, shot down and rescued by Americans, recounted treatment that contradicted everything they had been taught. During Operation Kikusui, a series of 10 massive kamikaze attacks on Okinawa in the spring of 1945, captured pilots gave astonishing testimonies. One of them, taken prisoner after a failed suicide attack due to engine failure, recalled, "The destroyer continued normal operations during our attack. The crew showed no panic. Everyone was at their posts, except for the gunners. Sailors in white uniforms continued to serve food. Ship's life went on as usual. This was not the desperate enemy we expected." These pilots witnessed, though they didn't understand it, the Americans' confidence in the effectiveness of their anti-aircraft defenses, which allowed them to maintain a normal ship routine, including mealtimes, even during attacks. While kamikaze pilots approached their tragic targets, American sailors continued to distribute ice cream on deck. During World War II, a silent competition in logistical capabilities unfolded between the US and Japan, particularly evident in the provision of food and resources to troops. By 1945, the American ice cream industry in the Pacific had reached unprecedented scales, significantly surpassing Japanese efforts in food provision. US production capabilities were impressive. The naval barge at Ulithi produced 500 gallons of ice cream, dispensing 10 gallons every 7 minutes. Army ice cream barges collectively produced 1,500 gallons. Practically every large vessel in the American fleet, including aircraft carriers, battleships, and cruisers, was equipped with ice cream machines. In 1943, 135 million pounds of dry mix for this dessert were shipped. The US Army Quartermaster Corps ensured an annual production of 80 million gallons of ice cream for servicemen. At the same time, Japan faced severe difficulties in supplying its troops and civilian population. The production of oil from pine roots, intended to compensate for resource shortages, amounted to only 3,000 barrels, despite the presence of 34,000 distillation units. By 1945, aviation fuel reserves had plummeted to a critical level, falling below 1,500,000 barrels. The civilian population experienced acute food shortages. Calorie consumption decreased from a pre-war 2,000 to 1,680 by the summer of 1945. In Tokyo, rations were as low as 775 calories per day for 6 months in 1946. Fuel scarcity also affected pilot training, which was limited to 40-50 hours. In comparison, the daily rice ration for all Japanese military personnel in the home islands was less than the American ice cream consumption in the Pacific Theater, vividly demonstrating the disparity in logistical capabilities and resource provision between the two countries. Admiral Chester Nimitz, whose personal decision it was to create the ice cream barge, understood an important aspect that eluded the Japanese military leadership. Morale is based not only on ideological conviction and a willingness for self-sacrifice. In his confidential address, Nimitz emphasized, the Japanese command is confident that harsh conditions will break American soldiers. However, he intended to demonstrate that America's industrial might extended to providing comfort for its crews. A sailor confident in his country's ability to deliver him ice cream, even in the midst of battle, would fight with far greater assurance than one who expects only hardship and deprivation. This principle formed the basis of supply for the entire Pacific Fleet. The episode involving the aircraft carrier USS Lexington in the Coral Sea on May 8, 1942, when sailors, abandoning the sinking ship, first rushed to the ice cream supplies, became a true legend. They literally scooped ice cream into their helmets before taking their places in lifeboats, demonstrating priorities utterly alien to Japanese military culture, where suffering was elevated to a virtue. Japanese naval officers, upon learning of the American ice cream operation, found themselves facing an insoluble dilemma. How could they maintain the morale of their soldiers if the truth about American supplies could undermine their fighting spirit? How could they explain to their sailors, who received only 315 grams of rice per day, and only if it was available, that Americans consumed 5 tons of ice cream from a single barge? Vice Admiral Matomi Ugaki, who commanded battleships and led the final kamikaze mission in August 1945, recorded in his diary after reviewing intelligence on the level of comfort enjoyed by American troops. If this information is true, then we have completely misunderstood the nature of this war. It is impossible to break the spirit of an enemy who brings luxury to the battlefield. This information was strictly classified, and officers who accessed it swore an oath of silence. However, truth, like water, finds its way through any barrier, seeping through walls of secrecy and spreading through the fleet in whispers and rumors. Japanese radar operators and observers couldn't help but notice B-29 bombers circling at high altitudes without any apparent tactical necessity. After the war, it was revealed that these aircraft crews were making ice cream, mixing powdered milk, sugar and cocoa in ammunition boxes. Using temperatures of 45 degrees at 9,000 meters, they froze the mixture, and turbulence acted as a churner. This level of confidence, allowing dessert to be prepared over enemy territory, where pine root-fueled fighters desperately scrambled into the air, represented an example of civilizational excess applied in wartime. While Japanese mechanics drained hydraulic fluid to use as emergency fuel, American pilots invented improvised ice cream makers at bombing altitudes. Between April 6th and June 22nd, 1945, during Operation Kikusui, the Japanese command launched 10 massive waves of kamikaze pilots against the American fleet off Okinawa. These suicidal attacks involved 1,165 aircraft, claiming the lives of approximately 4,000 Japanese pilots. Notably, Japanese aviators used outdated planes fueled by alcohol-diluted gasoline, which reduced engine power by 30%. The pilots' pre-flight meal consisted of rice balls and water, often their only substantial food for several days. Following the massive attack on April 6, 1945, in which 355 kamikaze planes sank 6 ships and damaged 22 others, US Navy reports documented the unwavering morale of the personnel. Interestingly, ice cream consumption on board increased by 40% after the encounter. The psychological impact of ice cream on American sailors after the battle cannot be overstated. It symbolized a return to normalcy, offered comfort, and reminded them of home. Japanese servicemen captured on Okinawa provided detailed accounts that shattered Japanese perceptions of their enemy. One destroyer officer, rescued from the water after his ship sank, recounted through interpreters, "I expected torture or execution, similar to how we treated American prisoners. Instead, a young American sailor, younger than my little brother, offered me ice cream, vanilla in a metal cup. He even apologized that they had run out of chocolate. I cried, not out of gratitude, but from the realization of our defeat." A nation capable of offering ice cream to its enemies had won the war before it even began. Declassified reports, carefully concealed during the war but meticulously recorded in occupation archives, reveal a colossal disparity between the Japanese and American armed forces. This gap proved to be far wider than even the highest-ranking Japanese commanders could have imagined. In August 1945, as the occupation began, American soldiers started offering ice cream to Japanese children. For many of these children, it was their first taste of the treat. The psychological effect of this simple act was astonishing. All the propaganda that the wartime government had instilled in the Japanese people for years about the barbarism and weakness of Americans was instantly shattered by a single frozen dessert. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, a celebrated Japanese ace pilot who survived the war with 64 confirmed aerial victories, tasted ice cream for the first time at an American airbase in 1946. Later, in his memoir Samurai, he wrote, "It was then that I finally understood the reason for our defeat. We fought, naively believing that suffering would toughen and strengthen us. They fought with an unshakable faith in the power of abundance. We mistakenly considered comfort a sign of weakness, while they knew that comfort was an inherent right that their powerful industry could provide anywhere. However, beyond the dry figures lay a stark contrast in the two powers' approaches to war. The final statistics vividly illustrate the chasm between the resource capabilities and strategic priorities of the US and Japan during World War II. American industry in 1945 reached unprecedented heights, meeting not only military needs, but also the basic comforts of its soldiers. As a curious example, the US Navy produced enough ice cream to provide every service member with a daily serving of the treat. The ice cream flotilla consisted of specialized barges capable of producing up to 500 gallons of ice cream per day, with Army equivalents adding another 1,500 gallons to the total volume. Across the entire war machine, this amounted to a colossal 80 million gallons of ice cream annually. A Additionally, American industry supplied 135 million pounds of dehydrated ice cream mix worldwide. Virtually every ship larger than a destroyer was equipped with ice cream making machines. One barge alone cost $1 million, equivalent to $17.2 million in 2024. The Japanese reality in 1945 was entirely different. A nation facing severe resource shortages was forced to cut sailors' rations to 315 grams of rice per day, and only when available. Amid fuel scarcity, the Japanese turned to alternative sources like pine root oil, but could only produce 3,000 barrels out of a targeted 70,000 barrels of pine oil. To implement this ambitious program, 400,000 workers were mobilized and 34,000 distillation plants were deployed nationwide. A shortage of skilled pilots led to flight training being reduced from over 500 pre-war hours to a mere 40-50 hours. Fuel quality also left much to be desired. A 30% alcohol mixture negatively impacted engine performance. In Japanese military doctrine, based on the Bushido Code, where suffering was seen as a means of spiritual purification, American ships delivering ice cream seemed utterly alien. Americans viewed comfort not as a sign of weakness, but as a factor that multiplied strength. For them, abundance was not a sign of decline, but a strategic advantage. Captain Mitsuo Fuchida, who led the attack on Pearl Harbor and survived the war, later converted to Christianity and became a devout pacifist. Explaining his transformation, he noted, "I learned that Americans offered ice cream to their enemies, not just food, but a refined delicacy. This was not the barbaric enemy we had been led to believe. This was a civilization so confident in its victory that it could afford to show kindness and care even during wartime. The ice cream ships challenged all the notions of war that Japanese military culture held sacred. At a meeting of US and Japanese veterans held in Hawaii in 1985, cultural differences remained evident. Japanese veterans, 4 decades later, still couldn't grasp the purpose of an ice cream barge. Robert Mitchell, a former Navy Seabee who worked at the Ulithi base, simply shrugged and replied, "We thought that soldiers engaged in combat needed ice cream. At the time, it didn't seem unusual. It was just a way of taking care of the troops. If we had the capability to do it, then why not?" This casual attitude where ice cream was taken for granted as something that should be available even during wartime demonstrated the chasm between the two fleets better than any military statistics. During one meeting discussing the reasons for Japan's defeat in World War II, former kamikaze pilot instructor Tadamasa Itatsu expressed the opinion that the key difference lay in approaches to training. Japanese pilots were trained to die hungry, while American soldiers were prepared to live in abundance, enjoying full meals and even desserts. Dr. John Dower, Pulitzer Prize winner, for his book Embracing Defeat, Japan in the Wake of World War II, emphasized the symbolic significance of the American ice cream barge at Ulithi. In his view, this vessel, embodying American economic might, represented a more powerful display of strength than an entire fleet of battleships. The ice cream barge, he suggested, effectively communicated, "We can afford this. Victory is already ours. It's just a matter of time until you realize it." Military historian Richard Frank, in turn, noted that Japanese soldiers went into battle seeking a glorious death, while American servicemen fought, hoping for a comfortable life after the war. This distinction, he argued, reflected not just different military strategies, but fundamentally different civilizational approaches to war. Today, at the Kanoya Air Base Museum in Kagoshima Prefecture, dedicated to the kamikaze pilots who flew from that base, a small plaque mentions the American ice cream ships. This plaque, installed in the 1990s, aims to show visitors how unequal the forces were. The museum exhibit displays a kamikaze pilot's last meal, a humble rice ball, pickled vegetables, and a cup of sake, alongside a photograph of an American ice cream barge obtained from US Navy archives. According to museum curator Teshi Yamada, this exhibit was created so that visitors, especially young people, could understand why Japan suffered such a crushing defeat. Seeing that Americans built special ships to carry ice cream, while the Japanese were searching for pine resin to produce fuel, makes it clear that this was not just a military defeat, but a clash of scarcity against abundance. The episode of Japanese officers witnessing American vessels brimming with ice cream illuminates the essential nature of power in modern military confrontation. Japan espoused the belief that strength stemmed from spiritual fortitude, unwavering will, and the ability to endure immense suffering. In contrast, America vividly demonstrated that true power lies in the ability to alleviate suffering, ensure abundance, and maintain a familiar way of life, even in the most extreme circumstances. The kamikaze, whose sacrifice cannot but evoke admiration, went to certain death, confronting an adversary who waged war of an entirely different kind. While Japan extracted fuel from pine roots, painstakingly producing 3,000 barrels with 34,000 distillation units, America built gigantic barges designed for industrial-scale ice cream production. While Japanese pilots composed death poems before their final training flights, lasting only 50 hours, American sailors nonchalantly chose between vanilla and chocolate treats. Japan measured success in spiritual categories, while America measured it in industrial output, including ice cream production reaching 10 gallons every 7 minutes. The war did not end when Japan ran out of pilots willing to sacrifice their lives. That resource was practically inexhaustible. The turning point came when the Japanese leadership realized the true nature of the force they faced, not just a military machine, but a society with such colossal might that it could afford to dedicate entire ships to making dessert. A society so confident in its strength that it considered comfort an inherent part of life. A society so prosperous that it could afford luxury even while engaged in a global war. The statistics speak for themselves, painting a compelling picture of the imbalance of power. While the American fleet at Ulithi numbered 722 ships, the Japanese fleet at its peak barely reached 700 units. American industry, demonstrating its might, produced 500 gallons of ice cream per shift from just one barge, while Japanese production of aviation fuel from pine roots was limited to only 3,000 barrels. American bomber crews enjoying ice cream at a dizzying 30,000 feet, sharply contrasted with Japanese pilots who had only 40-50 hours of training on diluted fuel. While American sailors fastidiously complained about the variety of ice cream flavors, their Japanese counterparts subsisted on 315 grams of rice, and only when available. Japanese commanders, realizing that America had ships solely dedicated to producing ice cream, faced a revelation that went far beyond military intelligence. They understood they were fighting an enemy who had already won, who was so confident in their triumph that they brought dessert to the brink of apocalypse. The ice cream ships visibly confirmed what the atomic bombs merely cemented. Japan was fighting a desperate war of scarcity against an unprecedented war of abundance. The outcome was predetermined and yet incomprehensible to those who naively believed that suffering was strength. Too late, they realized that true power lies in possessing such a level of prosperity that suffering becomes unnecessary. The multi-million-dollar ice cream barge at Ulithi, churning out 10 gallons of the treat every 7 minutes while Japanese pilots prepared for self-sacrifice, was not just a vessel. It was the embodiment of a civilization that had won the war before it even began. In a world of bitter pine root fuel and desperate selflessness, the American ice cream ships were not just an incomprehensible phenomenon. They served as proof that Japan had fundamentally misinterpreted the nature of the war it had entered. They brought a spirit of self-sacrifice into a contest of industrial might. They defied comfort, betting on suffering, and they had already lost,